the depression to dementia. Actually, in 2021, I ended up closing down my business, and there were a couple of reasons behind that. But one of the main reasons was I was losing my cognitive ability.
Sam, how did you find Carnivore?
Well, the short answer is YouTube, but there's a very long answer behind that. And I think desperation is probably the key word that I would use. Just becoming sicker and sicker over the past couple of decades with systemic, undiagnosed autoimmune disease, which kind of came to a head about 6 months ago. And just to kind of rewind and start at the beginning, I actually, when I was young, I had no problem losing weight. I was very athletic. I was a gymnast. I was on the track team, did some weightlifting, bodybuilding. And then I had my daughter when I was 19, and all of that came to a screeching halt. And suddenly I started finding that I really couldn't lose weight, and it was really difficult for me to regain my body, I guess, really feel at home in my body. And my husband at that time was a vegetarian and had been a vegetarian for probably 30 years at that point. And obviously, he was considerably older than I was. And so I became a vegetarian as well. And he was a Coca-Cola and Chips Ahoy cookie vegetarian. So it was a pretty carb-heavy lifestyle. I tried to keep the food, what in my mind was wholesome and whole. And so a lot of vegetables, a lot of rice, and just, your basic vegetarian diet. And it was very difficult for me because kind of from my ethical perspective at that point, I thought it was a great thing to do. But from a physical perspective, I was wrecked and my inflammation started getting out of control. I started noticing things like swollen joints, and I would get up from my chair and really shuffle for a few steps before I could really start to walk. And this isn't normal for someone of my age at that point. And so I experimented a lot with different approaches to vegetarianism, macrobiotic, and later on even became raw vegan, which I'll talk about. So I went through this for about 14 years of really doing my best, doing a lot of cardio, exercise, and eating my vegetarian diet, and just feeling miserable. When my first marriage ended, I met my husband now, and he is Italian. And so food is his life. And I know people associate things like pasta and pizza with Italian, but it really is more of a meat and vegetable kind of diet. So it wasn't that I was eating badly. I did start eating meat again, which I was very happy about because I absolutely love it. But again, I wasn't getting any better. So I discovered the Atkins diet and went on Atkins. I thought there was no way this was ever going to work because, of course, it was cream and butter and, heavy fat. And it did work somewhat. It worked for quite a long time. I lost about 35 pounds. My heaviest point, I reached about 249 pounds. And I lost about 39 pounds, 40 pounds from there on Atkins. But then I noticed it wasn't working anymore. And I started kind of experimenting with cutting way back on my calorie intake because I still had that calorie programming, and it wasn't helping. What it had helped was my inflammation. It had helped my arthritic condition. My grandmother had very, very bad arthritis, and when I was quite young, I was starting to really feel that arthritis specifically in my hands. And at the time, I was a massage therapist, so this was not good. And So I was happy with Atkins in that it really helped with the inflammatory issues and the hormonal balance issues, but I plateaued. And then I not only plateaued, but I started reversing. And I said, "What is going on here? I don't understand. I'm eating less, and yet I seem to be gaining weight again." And what I hadn't really factored in were the goodies, the Atkins bars and the Atkins treats and the Atkins candies and the Atkins fat bombs and all of the sweet stuff, even though it didn't contain sugar. And I was thinking, great, it doesn't have any sugar in it. It's, unlimited license, really, as long as I stay below my carb count. And it wasn't. And that's something that I also found on keto later on. It was the sugar addiction, the sweet addiction that really sabotaged my weight loss and sabotaged my health considerably. So after I got off Atkins, I looked around to see, well, what else can I do? And I found a carb confusion diet where you're doing high carb one day, no carb the next day, mixing all of that up. That didn't do anything. That was just a train wreck right out of the gate. And I got so disheartened and so depressed. And that was another piece of this, was the depression. And it wasn't just a, oh no, I can't lose weight depression. It really was an inflammatory driven, hormonal imbalance driven depression. And that kept getting worse. I also had some hypothyroid symptoms that were getting worse over time. I had developing IBS. So really it was just systemic inflammatory autoimmune issues. When I was about 8 years ago, all during this time, I really was health conscious, in the kind of, I guess I'll call it the new age, kind of healthy way. In fact, I was a very well-known new age teacher, spiritual teacher, meditation teacher, did all the right things. And the idea of eating heavy meat was really difficult for me to get around. It was not only difficult for me within my own ethical place, but it was difficult for me socially. It was difficult for me, from the perspective of my career. And so there were all of these roadblocks with going toward a meat heavy diet. I did eventually get on keto, and I'll call it cleaner keto than the Atkins diet, but I still hadn't made the link to the fake sweeteners and the weight loss piece. So I would do great for a couple of months, and then I'd start adding in the fake sweeteners, and then I would plateau. When I was about 47, I decided I wanted to do a bodybuilding competition for my 50th birthday. And so I went into bodybuilding pretty strongly. I was working out anywhere between an hour and a half and 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. I had a trainer who had actually worked with Sylvester Stallone and a couple of, Hollywood bigwigs years ago as their trainer. And so I really put a lot of faith into his system. And he was essentially raw vegan. And so he put me on a raw vegan diet, and I had done vegetarianism, and I thought, well, maybe I just didn't do it far enough. Maybe I had just too much rice and too much pasta and too much bread, which I absolutely did. And I thought maybe raw vegan really is the answer, because keto kind of fizzled out, Atkins fizzled out. So I had this heavy weightlifting routine, was working out 5 days a week and working out a lot and eating a very heavy raw vegan diet. And I have to say, Dave, I almost killed myself. It was such a difficult period, because when I got almost to the point, almost to my 50th birthday, when I was starting to cut my weight for the natural bodybuilding show, I couldn't cut any weight. And it made no sense to me whatsoever, because I wasn't eating anything. I was eating, gorilla salads, these giant salads. I was eating, just raw vegetables. But I did notice that whatever diet I was on, I was always trying to make it taste like birthday cake, And so with raw vegan, it was always trying to make these things that were just like, your standard American diet treat. When I was on keto, I was living off of the mug brownies and, doing that sort of thing. On raw vegan, of course, I could have all the fruit I wanted, so I was eating tons of fruit. I couldn't lose weight. And then I injured myself, and I was in the middle of a lift, and I lost the pin on the bar, and my shoulder went back, and I tore my supraspinatus in my rotator cuff, and also tore my Achilles tendon on my left leg. And normally I would have kind of healed from that and come right back from it. And I didn't. I could not heal. I was incapacitated for a good 6 months. Really had difficulty walking because of my Achilles tendon issue. I couldn't lift anything. I really fell into just a super deep depression. Not only was this great goal I had, to do the bodybuilding contest on my 50th birthday gone, but I realized I had really hit the wall as far as this systemic issue with not being able to heal, not being able to lose weight. It was far beyond just what the doctors were telling me, which was, oh, it's just age and, your hormones are going to go down and you're just not going to lose weight as fast. It was really far beyond that. I mean, when you're eating raw vegan and lifting for 3 hours a day and you're not losing weight, there's an issue. And I'm not talking about just weight, because of course muscle is heavier than fat, but you're not losing fat. That there's something really wrong there. So I just went off the rails. I said, forget it. Nothing's working. And so nothing is ever going to work. And I'm just, this is what I'm going to be the rest of my life. And it was really difficult. A couple of years ago, I started noticing a lot of the autoimmune disease stuff really starting to ramp up and develop and accelerate. And about 6 months ago, I ended up in the hospital with a thyroid storm. My hypothyroid that I had had for many, many years suddenly decided to switch on and go hyperthyroid. And in a thyroid storm, everything in your metabolism turns on high. And essentially 25% of the people that get it die because your heart fails, because your heart starts to race, your internal temperature goes up. And I didn't understand what was going on because I was still thinking I was hypothyroid. But in that moment when my thyroid switched and I went hyper, I lost about 45 pounds in about 3 weeks. So I was like, something's really not right here. I liked it. I'm like, oh, if I could just stay at this level of metabolism, it would be great. But of course you can't, or you die. And so once I became balanced from that episode, I realized that I needed to deal with the inflammation specifically, not the weight, not even the autoimmune, but the inflammation specifically, because it was the only thing I could think of that was fueling all of these different symptoms, from IBS to the depression to dementia. Actually, in 2021, I ended up closing down my business. And there were a couple of reasons behind that. But one of the main reasons was I was losing my cognitive ability. And I had gone to a naturopath, and she basically said to me, you've got all the symptoms of early onset dementia, which of course is terrifying. My grandfather had dementia. And dementia is different from Alzheimer's. Dementia is kind of a set of symptoms, but it can be fueled by a lot of different things. And they don't really know what causes early onset dementia, except you get all these symptoms earlier than normal. And I used to be very bright and very articulate. And, I traveled the world and gave workshops and seminars and could talk to 1,000 people, no problem. And suddenly I couldn't even remember my husband's name when I was sitting there looking at him. I mean, it truly was terrifying. And so I started doing as much research as I could, started just praying, please, Jesus, help me to find something to turn this around on the inflammatory level. And I had run across Dr. Ken Berry, way back when I started keto. And I didn't really follow him too much, but I did watch a few of his videos. And I happened to run across him online. And he was doing a video about the carnivore diet. And I said, this is nuts. He's gone off the rails. This is completely the opposite of everything that we are told and everything that we're taught. There is no way that this is going to work. But I was at the point where I had tried everything else. My doctors had nothing. They just had no answers, and didn't really seem too interested in coming up with answers, just pills to treat the symptoms. And so I was on 4 or 5 medications. So I decided to give it a try, and I went on carnivore, going on 4 months now. And the first thing I noticed was the inflammatory issues going away. And particularly, again, the debilitating arthritic type of pain and stiffness, literally, again, not being able to even walk. I have 2 steps that go up my front porch to my front door, and it was painful just to step up the steps. So the fact that suddenly I could walk up my front steps and not have that debilitating pain was absolutely amazing. So I was very, very excited about that. And that got me serious about exploring how far I could go with carnivore. While I still struggle with sometimes coming up with the right word, my cognitive issues are 100 times better than they were. I don't have the memory issues. I mean, it was at the point of almost blackout. I couldn't remember taking the car out and driving somewhere and coming home. I'd, be like, no, I didn't do that, when I very clearly had. So that level of cognitive issue suddenly was healing. And while I'm not back at 100%, I'd say I'm back at about 85%, which is a huge improvement. My thyroid has balanced out considerably. It still is not perfect, but I've been able to go off all but one of my medications. And I did that without my doctor approving of it. And I don't recommend that people do that, but I have to say my doctor didn't even know what medications I was on at that point. So I didn't feel too bad about taking ownership of what I was putting in my mouth. And so I started moving off the medications. Let's see, what else has improved? Hormonal balance, depressive tendencies have improved quite a bit. So it's really been, just in the past few months, a real positive shift. I am losing weight, which is also really nice. But I think that the bigger benefit for me is getting a handle on that inflammatory disease, because that really was what was causing so much of my problems, so many of my problems.
Congratulations. In 4 months to get to this point is after so much is just awesome.
Yeah, it's been almost miraculous. And I know it isn't like that for everybody, and it isn't that fast for everybody. But I know that my body was just trying to heal. It just couldn't, And so when I took the roadblock away, of constantly creating that inflammatory environment in my body, I was finally able to start shifting and to start healing, which was really a gift.
Mm. And yeah, I mean, you said it was terrifying to have those situations where you can't remember if you took the car out or something. I'm
Yeah.
just thinking to myself, yeah, I can't imagine what that would feel like. It was just, I don't know, like just thinking about it, it would be like a
Mhm.
feeling of being lost or something. It's
Yeah, it gave me a lot of compassion, certainly for people with Alzheimer's and dementia. Um, I didn't, a lot of the problem I didn't even know. My husband would point things out to me because my cognition was so far gone, I wasn't even recognizing that I had a problem. But there were certain things that were um, really issues. As I said, the biggest one was my acuity, my ability to just think on the fly, problem solve, come up with answers to questions, remember people's names. I used to be able to remember people's names from years ago. The minute I heard their voice or saw their face, it would all come back up. So that really impacted my social experience for sure. Um, but it also impacted my work when I was living in Arizona before I shut down my business. I was doing the writing books and doing seminars and doing videos and all of that. And then suddenly I left all of that and we moved here to Missouri and I had to change careers. And so I wanted to go into investments because that was something I'd always been interested in. And trying to learn something like that at this stage in my life. I just turned 55 last November. And so, changing careers would be a little bit slower of a process at that age than it would be earlier on. But it was really quite a struggle. I had to take a test called a Series 65 certification, which is essentially for an investment counselor type of person. And it's a 3.5 hour sitting for that test. It's just brutal. And it was so difficult for me to prepare for it, whereas previously it would have been, hard, but not that bad. It was really, really a struggle. So I knew something was not right at that point, but it just kept getting worse. And I think when I took the vehicle out and didn't even remember it and didn't even remember why I would have, where I would have been going, what I would have been doing, that whole peace was gone. It was like when I was in college and got so drunk I couldn't remember anything. But I wasn't, and I don't even drink alcohol. So it was very terrifying. The physical symptoms of the inflammation were also pretty terrifying. I mean, at 55, I really shouldn't be feeling that debilitated and have that much trouble healing my body and just moving my body, especially having been so athletic. So that was also quite scary. But I think the hardest part was the medical community saying, well, this is it, just deal with it. This is what you're going to be dealing with for the rest of your life. Um, and what's really funny now is, when I told my endocrinologist, and she is East Asian and she's vegetarian, when I told her I was on a carnivore diet, she was just shocked and appalled. It was like the worst possible thing I could do for my body. And yet here I was with everything balancing out and going off my medications. And she's still telling me it was not a good idea. So, there isn't really a lot of support in the medical community. So having videos like yours, and Ken Berry's and, Sean Baker and all of these different people that are putting up videos on the carnivore diet is so, so important, which is really why I wanted to be on with you, is just to help people who are struggling with that and not getting any support from their doctors or from their family or friends. So,
I thank you for that, and I think um, it is important to have that support out there, whether it's YouTube videos or discussion groups or whatever it happens to be, just because, like you say, there's not much support in the medical profession. And my feeling is one of the reasons there's not a lot of support in the medical profession is because when you go and see a doctor about something, they get fixated on one particular thing that you're exhibiting, whether that's might be related to your thyroid, it might be related to something else or whatever, and they just get so fixated on that one thing they can't think about any other nuanced item. Or it might be you go in and say, I'm on a meat only diet, and they get so fixated on that that they can't think of, they can't entertain any other reason why you might be having symptoms that you're having.
Right.
And yeah, it's a real roadblock.
Yeah, and it's interesting lately I've noticed people coming on to videos and saying, "I quit carnivore because I was on it for a month and a half and then I had a heart attack." Well, don't you think maybe you were building up to that heart attack before you went on carnivore? And it's not directly correlated, but because there isn't any support and because people struggle, I think, with finding true information and real pathways forward with the diet, it's easy to say, well, this medical issue suddenly arose once I went on the carnivore diet, and therefore it must be the carnivore diet, when most probably it's just surfacing and has been there for a very long time. And unfortunately, that gives a little bit of fodder for the cannon for the medical community. And so I think that we just need to be aware of that as well as a community, that, the diet may not be causing the health issue. The health issue may just be coming to the surface after many, many years. And it's not necessarily coincidental, but let's face it, there's probably a reason you went on carnivore, and that's because your health was not good. And so, the fact that you have a health issue arise really is not the diet's fault.
That's really well said. I think that's a really important message for people to get, especially people who are just getting started that are thinking, "Oh, am I doing the right thing?" Or, um, so I mean, you've had some amazing results, and just one thing I wanna highlight, you mentioned something that kind of had slipped my mind about my own situation that I can really relate to. You said when you kinda getting up to walk,
Mhm.
you'd have to do a bit of a shuffle to get going,
Yeah.
and that was what it was with me, like, when I used to sit on the ground, when I stood up, I'd have to shuffle to get started again, to kinda warm myself up or get the circulation going or something, or get the joints moving.
Yeah.
And I've worked with someone who had, Parkinson's, and, like, they were always shuffling. I think that's the thing with Parkinson's, always shuffling, and I was thinking to myself, "Is this the beginning of something like this for me?"
Mhm.
You know? But, yeah, it just
Yeah.
you start eating properly and things like that go away.
Yeah, and what was amazing to me when I went into the hospital with the thyroid storm, the reason I knew that I was having the thyroid storm, there were several different indicators, but a big one is tremors. So suddenly, I had had some tremors in my leg, and I was thinking, maybe it's just my muscles spasming or something. And then it got worse, and then it got worse. And then my right hand started shaking, my right arm. And then my head started going just like Parkinson's. And I said, I have to go to the hospital. This is not right. Um, and it was very much Parkinson's like tremors. And I have to wonder, how much the inflammatory piece feeds into um, other neurological diseases, that maybe that connection has not fully been made by medical science. But I realized, if I don't fix this, this is where I'm headed. And I didn't like it. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm really glad, you're on this track now and things are improving.
Mhm.
Um, so would you mind sharing with us how you're eating day to day?
Yeah, and I'm really lucky in many ways. Where we moved in Missouri is a fairly rural place, and it's a um, cattle country. There are a lot of ranches all around us. And so we can actually buy half a cow from the deacon at our church. For $800, we get half a cow. It works out being about $4 a pound, but that's every cut. That's everything from, prime rib to hamburger. So cost wise, that has really helped. So I'm eating grass fed, grown next door beef, which is wonderful. Um, a lot of hamburger at this point. I'm trying to stay away from things that are processed, like sausages, or I don't eat pork, and so it's pretty much all beef. I don't eat fish at this point. My biggest struggle has been the sugar addiction, and I think that is something that people really need to understand. If you have a sugar addiction and you start this diet, it's going to come up in your face very quickly, because you're going to want the diet sodas and the diet, whatever, the sugar-free candies. And those are as bad for your body, really, as the sugar is. And so recognizing that you need to deal with that. And that's something I'm still dealing with. I'm still weaning myself off things. I still like to have some stevia in my coffee. Or, if I really go off the rails, I'll make some jello out of beef gelatin, and have some monk fruit in it or something for a sweetener. But I try not to do that, because it just feeds the addiction. It's like saying I can have a little bit of heroin, it's not going to bother me. Well, yeah, it really is, and it's very much like saying that, actually, because that's what sugar is. It's just like, a serious chemical like cocaine or heroin. And the addiction factor with it is very, very high. And so there is that emotional detox from sugar that has to happen. And I think that's the hardest part of choosing my meals, is making sure that I'm not going in that direction, that I'm not choosing things that are going to be sweet tasting, or, and like I said, I don't eat pork any longer, but like my husband loves bacon, but a lot of bacon is cured with sugar. And so, that's something I have to stay away from, because not only is it pork, but you can also get turkey bacon or, beef jerky, but there's a lot of hidden sugar in those things. So those processed foods I try to keep to a bare minimum. And I will eat for breakfast 3 or 4 eggs, just scrambled usually. I usually will put some cheese in it, because cheese, I love it. um, and usually some type of meat left over from dinner the night before. Like this morning, I had some hamburger that I had seasoned. I do use seasonings, just try to stay away from the sugar containing seasonings. So I use garlic powder, onion powder, things like that. And so I had some taco meat that I had made, and I mixed that in with my eggs. For lunch, I'll have a couple of burgers, or a steak, or something that, is pretty much just beef meat. Yeah. And I don't try to make it be like something else. It makes me laugh when I see the videos on YouTube that say, made out of cabbage tastes just like meat. Well, no, it doesn't. You can pretend it does, but it really doesn't. So I've stopped trying to make my food try to taste like something other than what it is. And that's an adaptation process as well, just trying to eradicate the addictions to over seasoning and over flavoring foods, and recognizing that what your body really wants is the meat and the fat. And that's pretty much it. I do quite a bit of butter. And usually if I get a sugar craving, I will eat some browned butter bark, or just a piece of butter. My coworkers think I'm nuts, because I'll just whack off a hunk of butter and, be eating it like a cookie. But it really helps my body to work with those cravings. I do soups and stews quite a bit during this weather, and that helps as well because they're quite filling. And sometimes just eating steak all the time can just be too dense. And so having something with broth is kind of nice. I try to stay away from too much of the processing of foods, but I do have a freeze dryer, which is really nice. So doing freeze dried chips out of meat. You can even do them dehydrated. But that really has been a treat as well, just dipping that in some sour cream with salt.
Oh, nice. That
Yeah,
sounds awesome. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I am really fortunate that we have such a great source of meat and beef in the area, and
Mm,
lamb as well. I eat quite a bit of lamb, though it's a little harder to find here.
mm. So, how is your husband with this? Is he joining you?
Not quite. He's very good. I mean, we've been together now for 23 years, and so he has been with me through a lot of these food changes. And I mean, really from A to Z, right? Every diet under the sun you can possibly think of. And so every other week I was going, okay, I'm going on the, all potato chip diet or whatever it was that week. And he's like, okay, whatever. So really the way that we adapt at this point is we'll focus the meal around a meat, and then he'll have some side dish, a vegetable usually, or maybe a little pasta or something. But he doesn't really have a problem with that, as long as I don't insist that he just eat a piece of meat without anything else. He likes to have some other flavor there. But it has been a little bit hard on the sweets and snacks end of things. So, not wanting to have a lot of snacky stuff in the house because that's a temptation for me. So, we've kind of found a middle ground with Jello. As I said, some type of gelatin or jelly dish usually helps. And then he'll have his little stash of sweets somewhere, but he keeps them out of my face so that I don't have to go through that process of kind of struggling with that. But it is an adaptation. You really get to understand how important food is in family structure and in relationships. And when there's an incompatibility there, it can really be a struggle. I mean, when I was raw vegan, it was much harder on him than it is now because he was at no point going to become a vegetarian. So I think this is, relatively easy compared to some of the other tangents that I've been on.
Mm. What does the future hold now for Sam? Like, will you continue with this? And how do you feel about now that you're seeing improvements? How do you feel about the future?
I feel really good about it right now. I know myself well enough to know that I go on, ups and downs. I think it's a Tibetan saying that only demons travel in straight lines. There are going to be ups, there are going to be downs, there are going to be, peaks and troughs. And the key is for me to deal with the troughs, to prepare for those so that it's easier for me when I hit them. And I've already found that uh, it seems like I'm on a kind of 4 to 6 week cycle with feeling really great about the way things are going, and then going into a if I can't eat some sugar right now, I'm going to kill somebody type of space. So I try to look ahead at how I can prepare so that I have some easy access foods that are still healthy, still carnivore, but I don't have to compromise. And that also is important for things like getting home late from work, and not wanting to really cook. So having something prepared, doing some meal planning and preparation ahead of time really, really helps. I don't see myself going off a carnivore diet. I might modify it at some point, but I think I'm still in that elimination phase. I think until my inflammatory issues and my autoimmune disease are really, kicked to the wall, I'm not going to go off of this because that is the source and the core of everything that was going wrong in my body and in my life. And so I really can't compromise on that. It's, I tell myself that it's almost like someone who has a peanut butter allergy. It's not something that you can compromise on. You can't just decide, oh, I'm going to go out and, buy a jar of Skippy and sit down and cheat on my no peanut butter lifestyle, because you will die. I might die more slowly, but I will die faster if I am eating the things that I shouldn't be eating. So there is a development of discipline there, of needing to really make sure that I'm keeping front and center, dealing with the emotional issues. That I think that's a really, really important one that I haven't seen talked about a lot. The addictions, and I won't go as far to say it's like you need a 12-step program or anything, but almost, that sometimes food addictions can be even more difficult because society doesn't recognize it as a problem. They recognize it as a lack of self-discipline or a lack of willpower, but they don't recognize it as a core health issue, that you have this addiction to cookies or to potato chips, or, they'll just kind of think you just aren't very good at regulating yourself. And so it's harder in a lot of ways emotionally to deal with this diet than some of the other diets I've been on. Certainly, a lot of my friends and cohorts from the old days when I was a, new age guru, I just think I've completely lost the plot. There's, not only have I gone off and become a Christian, but I have now stopped being a vegetarian and I'm eating half a cow. So there's some adjustment there as well. And food is very social. So what do you do at parties? Plan ahead, take something that you can eat. Make sure that you are preparing so that you have what you need when you hit those little troughs or big troughs. And I think anticipating them is really important, because if you don't, you really are not going to have any option but to go off the diet and sabotage yourself. So, yeah. If
I
that
think
makes
that's
sense. Does that make sense?
yeah. I think that's really important for people to hear,
Mhm.
especially people that are thinking about getting started, but they're not sure what to do. That's a good message for them to hear. Anticipate what's going to happen, be prepared, and you know, um, really kind of be very vigilant at first, right? It's
Mhm.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think another piece of that is training yourself to eat things that you wouldn't normally eat. I'm really trying to work my way to being a tip to tail kind of eater. And when I used to eat steak, I'd cut off every single piece of fat. I mean, I just wouldn't even want to touch it. If there was a little bit of gristle, I'd be like, ew, I'm not going to eat that. Now I look for the pieces that have that. And that hasn't necessarily been an easy transition. I had to force myself to eat things that I didn't want to eat in order to allow my body to adjust to that. And I think that's important, because when we're coming off, a standard American diet or just a standard modern human diet, we're used to having things that are super, super flavorful, like beyond flavorful. They'll add more flavoring to it to make it even more flavorful. And so your palate is so spoiled, I guess I would say, that it really does take some training to be able to eat nutritious, basic food and enjoy it. You're not going to enjoy it all the time at first. You're going to get to the point of being like, if I have to eat another piece of beef, I'm going to scream. But if you can work through that and push through that, and again, look at the emotional pieces around it, it really can be quite rewarding to know that you're consuming parts of an animal that normally would not be consumed, or appreciating things like organ meats, which I would not have appreciated previously. So there is some adaptation there. And I'm not saying you have to go be a caveman, but certainly recognizing that living on filet mignon for the rest of your life is not going to work either. There needs to be some variation there.
Very nice. And so, Sam, do you have an Instagram or a YouTube or anything if people want to reach out to you?
I do have a YouTube channel. There's not much there at the moment. I took down everything from my past life, but it's at Samaya's Light. And Samaya is Samaya. So Samaya's Light. Also on Facebook, you can find me at Sam Ortoli, Ortoli. So certainly, feel free to reach out to me. I'm totally happy to share what I can. And, I'm still a newbie at this, but I've been through so many other experiences with food that I think, yeah, I've figured out what works for me and what to watch out for. So hopefully I can be of help to someone.
Thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your story, Sam. I really appreciate it, and really good to hear you're doing so well.
Oh, thank you, Dave. And thank you for doing what you're doing. I really appreciate it.